Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. My name's Stephanie Edmonds. Welcome to Teaching Liberty. To live free, you have to think free. And that is exactly what we do here on that show. We're definitely going to have to do some free thinking because we are taking on an important topic that could use some new, fresh perspective. And that is, why does the government not solve any problems? Why does it seem we are always doomed to repeat history, right? Our historical memory here in America is quite short. So we're going to tackle, just a little small problem here tonight, nothing too crazy, and get into some historical examples to consider as we figure out how to move forward here. And we're going to do that all with my guest, Jim Miller, who is a fellow, I was going to say Connecticutite, but I guess we call ourselves nutmeggers. So a fellow nutmegger from the state of Connecticut, right? The Constitution state. So we might know a thing or two about American founding values. And he also has a Substack called Comments from Connecticut. So make sure that you are supporting him over there for sure. Right here, you can pull that up real quick. And you can see I made some references to some articles that sort of inspired this episode. Why doesn't the government solve problems? Will history rhyme? So head over to his Substack. I have that linked in the description down below. But first, stay here, hang out, and have a little conversation with us. How's it going tonight, Jim?
It's going well. Good to see you, Stephanie.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. We've unlike I guess most of my conversations, you and I actually met in real life
That's
and
true.
have done things in real life. And now we're taking it here to the internet to sort of share some of our ideas. So that's pretty refreshing. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
And you have this Substack, which I subscribe to, and you often publish things, and that's why I was like, hey, you got to come on my show, and we have to talk about the article in particular was will history rhyme? And you go through this historical example of the Republican Party in the late 1800s and how they sort of had the option, I guess, when they were going through some change to go one direction or go in the direction of corruption and dirty politics. And we're getting into what they chose and what that says about politics today. But why don't we just start with your big take? I mean, you've been around a few more years than me. You've seen a few more things. So can you share with us like your wisdom?
Well, I guess what brought me to this is I'm curious. And like you said, America has very little historical memory. And, I happened to get a book for Christmas that was about the 1870s, 1880s, and American politics. And I read it and I was just, wait, this is all happening again right now. And I wanted to share those thoughts with everybody. So what happened basically in the TLDR version is after the Civil War, the Republicans really had a lock on national politics. The Democrats had supported slavery. The Republicans won basically everything they wanted. And at that point in time, there were mass rallies. The way elections worked is they would get people to march around the cities with torches and put on uniforms to support their candidate. And these things were very expensive to run. Like all the people marching had to wear the uniform and they had to have the time to do it. And then they would be, fed some kind of a dinner or whatever afterwards to thank them for their support. And the system was basically that the people who got out the vote and did the voting on behalf of the candidates could expect to be rewarded by the politicians who got elected. And that was known as the spoils system. When somebody got elected and you had been a big supporter of their campaign, you could expect a very cushy job with very little responsibility, with either a decent salary or an opportunity to collect bribes.
And this is
And
right around the time of Tammany Hall as well, if I'm thinking right.
correct, yes.
Yes, I
Uh,
know. We definitely cover that one in American history class, so I've taught that one a few times.
yeah, so the Republicans kind of had a lock on government, and the biggest source of money was the New York City what do you call it, the Customs Bureau, where shipping would come into the port of New York, and the federal government then had a lot of revenues from tariffs, and the customs inspectors could kind of get bribes to slip things through, or interpret the rules to give a higher or lower tariff. And so the people who worked in the customs house made fortunes, and that whole system was controlled by a guy named Roscoe Conkling, who was a senator from New York, and he basically decided who got the jobs and who got the money after each election. And who then became President Garfield, was first a congressman and then a senator from Ohio, who didn't even really want to run for president. And he got nominated at the Republican convention after 35 rounds of ballots, where nobody for 35 rounds got a majority.
Wow.
And he was.
I want to just pause there though for a second, right? Because I know we talk about how intense like these political battles are. And again, we talk about how there's no historical precedent, and it's, I can't believe that they play these games, and we're talking about 35 rounds. Like
Yeah,
there's definitely some tension there, right? There's
a
definitely some
lot of tension,
party politics.
and a lot of prominent people wanted that nomination, including President Grant, who had already been president and had been the Civil War hero, and William Tecumseh Sherman's brother was in the running, and a senator from Maine who had formerly been Speaker of the House. So there were a lot of powerful people who wanted that nomination, but the Republican Party was split over the morality of the spoils system that many of them were benefiting from. And Garfield was a remarkable man. He grew up dirt poor in a log cabin in Ohio. His father died when I believe he was 3 years old, and he was raised by a single mom trying to barely scrape a living together. And he went off and worked on the Erie Canal for a while as a young man. And finally got himself a solid education and became a first-rate classical scholar, and got a scholarship to Amherst and went to college, and then started. He was later a general in the Civil War on the Union side, and then started a political career. And he was probably one of the most effective public speakers of the time. And he made a floor speech in the convention that caused him to get nominated, even though that wasn't what he actually wanted. But it was such a powerful speech, he was nominated as the Republican candidate for president. And anyway, he was against the corrupt system, but his vice president, who's now escaping me, but I can look at it, was an appointee from Roscoe Conkling, who was previously head of the New York Customs House. And so Garfield got to Washington, and it was before there was a Secret Service or anything. And so for months, hundreds of people would come to the White House every day and sit there waiting to meet with either Garfield or one of the senior cabinet members, saying, I want this job, I want that job, where's my job? So he was like literally for months just dealing with people who thought they deserved one of these plum appointments for their support in the election.
His name is Chester Alan Arthur.
Chester A. Arthur. Sorry. So, and Chester Arthur was there, basically to keep an eye on the spoils for Conkling. And so there was a deranged guy named Guiteau, I believe is the pronunciation, who was from New York, and he came repeatedly to the White House and then to the State Department, and he was literally crazy, and he thought he was supposed to be the ambassador to France. And Garfield wouldn't appoint him, and nor would his Secretary of State appoint him, and they told him, you're not allowed to come here anymore, go away. And so this guy, took his last $10 and bought a revolver and tracked Garfield down at the train station when he was on his way to go to summer vacation on the Jersey Shore to meet his wife, and shot him and in the back. And Garfield didn't die immediately. He actually died over, I forget, several months eventually of an infection. But Garfield was never able to make any headway against the corrupt system. There was just too much institutional momentum keeping all of the corruption in place. And people blame Chester Arthur. They said he had the most to gain. He's probably the guy behind this assassination. And he wasn't. He had nothing to do with it. But he was so horrified to be seen as such a terrible person who would kill Garfield, who everybody loved. He was an incredible man, that he had a complete change of heart. And when he became president after Garfield's death, he totally reformed the entire civil service system and created the civil service exam, wanted professional qualifications from government workers. And so I guess the real point that I was getting to in my article was, I don't see how the Republicans can effectively battle the deep state. Something like 97 or 99% of federal government employee donations go to Democrats. There's just probably no way that an outsider is going to be able to have enough political capital to change much of anything in
Well,
that.
like, my question is, like, do any of the Republicans, I know you say that all these deep state people vote Democrat, but I don't see much of what the Republicans want that's different, on the
Well,
federal level,
that's
especially
probably
when they're,
true.
you know so that's some of this, like, left-right stuff that, I don't really buy into. But I understand what you mean. It doesn't matter, I guess, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. It's like, well, what is actually a feasible road to get these things done without getting yourself killed? How was Arthur able to escape the same fate as Garfield?
Well, I think it's because he had been part of the system. So there's like nobody who has a stronger conviction than somebody who reforms themselves, whether it be, a former addict or a former alcoholic. And once they become sober, they become the best advocate for that. And people respect that. I think it commands a different level of respect when somebody has been in their shoes and says, no, wait, there's a better way we should do this, rather than some outsider comes in and says, you're evil. I don't want you anymore. Go away. Um, and the other point I made in that article is, we don't have exactly the same spoil system that they did back in the 1800s, but you could link an awful lot to how the teachers union works. Um, in terms of the teachers union is a massive get out the vote machine.
Right.
Uh, and then after the teachers union becomes responsible for the election of, I'm not talking about the federal level, but, a governor or, certain key legislators, then they come and they negotiate the teachers union contract with the same person that they
Right.
just caused to be elected. So, our modern day example of this is,
Well, I
just,
would also say the revolving door, right? You have people who go from the State
yeah,
Department to the private industry or private industry to different positions in federal government, or, back and forth. I
absolutely. The
think, like,
revolving door is real.
yeah, like our Secretary of State right now, Blinken, he was previously in government. I forget what he was, but in between his government stints, he was in a military contracting business, you know?
Right.
So it's like, like, I guess his pay back for being such a great military contractor is now he gets to be Secretary of State, and he you know,
Right. And a regulator from the FDA ends up at Pfizer and then back in government, after a period of time. All of this is
all
true.
the different industries, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I
Um,
don't really see how you can say it's really much different. I think the union one is a particular example, with the contract negotiation, but I mean, it really is the same, paying to get your drugs passed through industry, paying to have your contracts in the weapons industry be chosen. It's all, they're coming for the spoils.
Absolutely. Well, and this kind of goes back to your earlier question. Why doesn't government work? And government doesn't work because government isn't trying to work. The incentives for a politician are to get reelected, to continue to have power, and to continue to be in a position to extract money from the system for themselves, their friends, and their family. And we don't even have to get into the incredible insider stock trading that the people in Congress pull off. But they actually have better rates of return than Warren Buffett over long periods of time.
Yeah, like
For
insane rates of return.
yeah, 40%, numbers like that. So anyway, the point of a politician is in order to get reelected, what you want to do is you want to rile people up about an issue. So let's take a very controversial issue, abortion. Roe v. Wade was about 50 years ago now. And it would have been very easy at any time over those last 50 years for Congress to have enacted some national statute on abortion, whatever could have been passed, something allowing abortion up to a certain number of weeks or whatever. But there's a very clear public support in favor of reasonable access to abortion in the American populace, I think. And there has been this entire time for 50 years. But it was more convenient.
Yeah,
Let me finish.
I was going to say that we can't campaign off of it. That
Exactly.
We can't raise off of it.
You can't raise money. You can't activate voting blocks if you solve the problem. So the incentive is to just continuously say, well, it's the Supreme Court's fault. We need to do something about this, and you need to donate to my campaign, and you need to vote for me. And you could pick, all kinds of issues. It's the same thing where, border control and immigration. I mean, how many immigration policy proposals have come up in the last 30 years? I couldn't even count them. Or, a carbon tax was almost passed under, let's see, which the second Bush. So the climate issue, could have been pretty much, not solved, but at least some serious progress made.
Did you just recommend a tax, Jim?
I think if you're going to solve the carbon dioxide issue, the most sensible way to do it is by a carbon tax.
All right. Well, we'll have to fight about that one on a different podcast.
That's okay. Just from an economics perspective, it doesn't mean that you can't. You could take the money from the tax and use it to support like a UBI if you wanted to, because you've made everything more expensive. But anyway, there's the idea of cap and trade.
This gets to another point, like without going down like this, like global warming, carbon tax, thing, we can bring it out to, well, I guess like even before we get to the philosophical point, we will get there, is I'm feeling a little black pilled. You know what that means?
No.
Okay. So
red pill and blue pill is from,
right. Yeah, so we got the red pill, the blue pill, right? Blue pill, I just want to stay like in the matrix, ignorance is bliss. Red pill is you go down the rabbit hole, you're Neo. But then you have white pill and you have black pill, right? So white pill is like, oh, like you're optimistic about the world and everything's great. Black pill is like you're a nihilist. And the way that you're setting things up, being like, it doesn't really seem like there's much hope to save this, what we have going on here. An outsider can't come in and do this. Maybe an insider would do it, but we see that they all seem to be into the game. Like there hasn't been any hope for insiders, or they just get offed, right? I think the last couple of really big American leaders that we've had have not survived into their later years.
Right. So that wasn't my intent. Because I guess really where I'm going with this is the voters are getting the politicians they deserve, right? And we have a democracy, and we actually have a constitutional republic, but the voters have a say, and the voters could use their votes a lot more effectively if they thought a little bit more deeply about the messages that they're believing and the causes that they're thinking they're supporting, but they're not effectively supporting.
So you have faith. You have faith in the voting system. You have faith that going to the voting booth, those things translate over into real outcomes. Just here in Connecticut, we saw how they, with all the absentee ballots and the early voting, that they're rigging the game. Like, this isn't conspiracy theory. Like, both sides got caught red-handed. So, do you have faith that it even matters? Like, even if we all like woke up and we voted for the right guy, would they let us win?
I think so. I mean, there's a limit to how much of the shenanigans in voting that can be gotten away with. I mean, this isn't. The other thing is, none of these are new problems. It's widely believed that the votes in Chicago tossed the 1960 presidential election to Kennedy through some sort
Yes.
of corruption, right? So this is not a new problem. America has survived these problems before, and America goes through periods where we're all messed up and periods where we kind of get things working. And I kind of subscribe to the Winston Churchill theory that, America always does the right thing after they've tried everything else first. So we've been trying a lot of the wrong things here for a while, and probably it's time we're going to start trying some of the right things.
I mean, I certainly hope so. Okay, so now I see that this is a white pill, not a black pill. Got it. I generally try to stay, on the white pills.
Good.
Um, So, I guess, like, my whole thing then is, like, philosophically in the marketplace of ideas, how do you sustain a lively populace that is engaged in these ways and doesn't succumb to the powerful forces, right? Like, even beyond just, like, the voting booth and all that, Americans are subjected to enormously high levels of propaganda and programming and the culture wars. It doesn't, whether it's political or not even political, right? Like, we can't watch the Super Bowl without it being like also about politics.
Yeah.
So, like, even if we ha- say we achieve this thing, like, how do we sustain it? How do, in this marketplace of ideas, it just seems like democracy doesn't have strong protections, or republic, a constitutional republic.
Yeah, I see your point. I mean, certainly there is mass manipulation of media. The media used to be an independent watchdog, and now the media is a player on the playing field. I think is fair to say. Um, I don't know. Myself, I got rid of cable TV. I think it's about 9 years ago now, so I haven't watched cable TV in nearly a decade. So that's a good step for everybody, I think. Um, but now the younger people are all getting their information from YouTube and TikTok, and there the algorithms are programmed to give you more of whatever you seem to be liking. So it kind of
Right.
concentrates the opinion into, it doesn't matter whether it's left or right or whatever you want to call your division in this country, because I don't think those terms are very
Cat videos,
accurately
some people
descriptive.
just go on there to watch cat videos, it's just like all cat
Exactly.
videos all day. um Yeah, no, they
Cat
serve
for
you up more of
president.
what you like. Yes, hey, literally
And
anybody
and then
else at this point.
and the opposing candidate will be dog for president.
Listen, I'd vote
Um,
for Mickey Mouse.
so, I mean, it's all very frustrating. I mean, I don't know what the exact poll numbers are, but um, pretty much nobody wants the contest we're going to have for president.
I know, 2020
Is
round
really out of
4.
Yeah, I mean, out of 330 million people, we couldn't find two other people to be the candidates. It's remarkable. Um, but the green shoots I see are that independent media is beginning to get reasonable traction. I mean, I have unsubscribed from, I think, all but two newspapers at this point. And I used to probably have 6 or 8 newspaper subscriptions. And I find incredibly good content on Substack. And I'm not trying to push my own, I'm terrible compared to most of what I see on Substack. But there's some really thoughtful people putting great content out through independent channels, and even just your channel. on YouTube is a great way for people to get another perspective and try to spend more than a 20-second soundbite on a topic. I mean, that's the other issue.
Right, and I would say, like, if there's one thing that you can do is, like, go to the source of the thing that they're talking about. So if it's an email or if it's a Supreme Court case or if it's whatever the thing
Yeah.
is, go to that source, and oftentimes in those mainstream, CNN or, The Guardian or whatever, they just reference themselves. You'll be like, "Oh, look, they've linked, they've cited their source." No, 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 they're self-citing to, like, some other time that they
Well,
reported on some issue vaguely related.
but my favorite line is most experts agree.
There you go,
Mhm.
or the researchers, you
Yeah.
know? So yeah, do your own research, definitely don't just trust those headlines. The other thing that I think, and again, this is how we got brought together, is just local politics. And so like maybe let's bring this down to like more of a state level. We're here in Connecticut, so we can use that as an example, but I think this applies similarly to, any state across the country. Is okay, so we're down here on the state level, we're involved, we're going up to the state house and we're making our testimonies, or you can do it through Zoom and you're reaching out to your rep and this and that. And it just seems like that there's these astroturf groups, like these non-governmental organizations, and it just so happens like all their boards are filled with like the friends or the husbands or the wives or like even the reps themselves that then are like the main people who are like lobbying and like get special access to like write the language in the bill. And so
Yeah.
it just seems like, okay, like forget the federal level. Like I'm not even paying attention to the federal level. I think it's hopeless. But I'm down here on the state level and it's like kind of like that seems like it's like not so great either. So what
Well,
would be a strategy here on the state level that you think that we could take?
I guess the first thing I would say is I think people in Connecticut don't really understand how much power the state legislature has. Your local government actually only exists because the state legislature allows it to. Basically, that's how Connecticut works. So, for example, you're a school board member and you might think that you could choose your curriculum for your district. Well, no, you can't. That you have to choose, you actually are an agent of the state government to enforce state policy within your district from a legal perspective. Now, the state may give you certain latitude to make some choices, but that what latitude they give you to make choices is really only what they affirmatively give you. And so for example, the right to read legislation. And I don't know if you followed this one, but
Yeah, this is the one, like, I know the big thing is basically, like, it protects librarians and other people who make decisions about
no,
books.
no, no, different bill. So
Okay,
the right to read legislation passed, I don't know, 2 years ago or something like that, and it's meant to cause local districts to use the most effective reading
oh,
programs.
phonics, the
Yeah,
phonics.
yeah, which as a teacher, the science says phonics is the best way to do it. And so what they said was the state board of ed should review the reading programs of every district. And if you're not using one of 5 reading programs that they designated, I think the legislature allowed the state board of ed to choose certain programs. They said these programs are good. And if your district isn't using one of those programs, you had to go apply for a waiver from the State Department of Education in order to continue using some other program that you were using. So I happen to live in Regional District 18 in the eastern part of the state, but there were, I don't know, a half a dozen or 10 high-performing districts that didn't use any of these approved programs. And they applied for waivers so that they could continue using the programs that were creating, 90% of the kids are at or above grade level kind of numbers. And the State Department of Education said, nope, your program's no good. You have to use our approved program. And by the way, guess what? You have to buy all new textbooks. You have to train your teachers, and it's going to cost, this district $500,000, this district 2 million. It depends on the size of the district.
Right.
Now, why do you think something like that happens? It's
Well, somebody's friend.
somebody's
Oh,
friend is in the educational publishing business,
yeah.
right? It
Yeah,
has absolutely nothing to do with the title of the bill. And so the number one thing I would say is, in Connecticut, don't listen to what they say the bill is about. You have to actually read the bill and see what it
right,
says.
right. They're not gonna call it, "We're forcing you to change the reading program and pay, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to do it so." They're gonna name it the right to read.
Exactly. And then of course, in the soundbite news show, we passed the right to read bill today. Aren't we great? And,
Right.
and of course, everybody who's watching the TV news for that 20-second clip says, "Oh, that's fantastic. Our state is supporting the people with the most difficulty learning to read." Well, that has got nothing to do with it. Nothing at all. Um, so
So and I
knowing what is in the legislation, and then holding your legislators accountable in the ballot, in the elections. What is your voting record? What did you vote for? What did you not vote for? Why? Are you casting your ballot for the benefit of your constituents? These are the kind of questions people need to be focused on.
And the thing I like about state politics is that the way that the districts are is the person is gonna live pretty close to you, right?
Right.
I mean, if you're in a bigger state, I suppose like Colorado, it can still be like kind of quite a distance. But here in Connecticut, especially, they live pretty close to you. And so you can actually go out and meet these people. They're not just characters on your TV screen. They're people who live in your community, in your neighborhood, and maybe your kids, interact with them in different ways. So I feel like there's a lot more potential there to actually build something that's real rather than just at the federal level, how everything just becomes like a reaction machine of these characters who, they're just characters on your TV. Like they could be actors, like not real people.
Yeah, and as you say that, I mean, I saw my state rep in the grocery store about 2 weeks ago. So yeah, these people are, they're around, they're available, and hopefully they care about their constituents enough to have a sensible conversation.
Yeah, and at the very least too, I just feel like at least it gives you the opportunity, like, even if they're not super amenable to you, at least you have that opportunity to put a little bit of pressure on them, right? To make them really feel the responsibility of their position, because I think that's very important. Like, of course, you don't have to, like, be confrontational, but just, like, just asking them questions and making them at least think about, somebody else's perspective.
Mhm.
And then something else that I've seen too is that even sometimes when bills pass that you're not so keen on, you can impact the language just by going and asking questions and putting out op-eds. You can at least change the trajectory of laws that would have been really, really bad to things that are just like kind of bad. Um, or stop them altogether, like, put the brakes on them and then they have to like take them up at the next legislative session.
Yeah. I mean, the classic is when something isn't getting enough traction to get passed, the bill is passed to turn it into a study.
Yeah, we
So
have to
whenever there's a study, you got to watch that because in a year or two it's coming back.
it's like, geez, government studies, man. Studies and councils and committees. We're gonna create a committee that's gonna look into this thing. And I'm just like, oh. So and like that's my thing is like I just don't know. Like or this was my question, right? So where does federalism come into play? Because you were saying like, okay, like a school board member technically or legally speaking under Connecticut law, they're just an agent of the state. But I do know that there's um, the idea that our country was made in was federalism. Now, do state rights override that? Because just saying, well, our localities don't get a lot of rights. You can go to a different state if you want that, or what? What? how much energy on the local level can you use in your elected positions to push back in the state and be like, "No, in our school, we are not doing that."
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to talk to somebody. I'm not on our school board. I happen to sit on my town's board of finance, so I've got enough things I'm juggling. School boards are. I want to thank everybody who serves on a school board because that is an unbelievable amount of work. So thank you all school board members out there for doing what you can for our education system. That is a labor of love. That's, at least by me, it's very much appreciated. And one of my neighbors was just elected to our school board, and I see him at the bus stop, and he's getting quite an education in the amount of time that this time commitment involved. So anyway, where was I going? So yes, so the United States, actually, the great feature of the United States is we have 50 states. Each one is different. I'm no expert on state law enough to say, in Tennessee, does a school board have control? But in Connecticut, it doesn't. I have no idea. But at least we know there's experimentation going on, and
Right.
people can look around and, Florida tries one thing, California tries something else, Nevada tries some other thing. And then we get to look around and see, well, this is working and that's not working, and maybe we ought to have a new conversation. So there is at least that, that experimentation.
'Cause I always see these school board members and I'm just like, I feel like you have more power. Like, you tell me, "Oh, I can't do this or I can't do that," or but I'm just like, why not? Why can you not challenge the state? Like, isn't that what this is all about? This country is about different levels of government, you know, going back and forth with each other. Like, call the state out on some of their stuff. Like, what are they gonna like? What are their levers of enforcement? It's basically funding, right? Like, they can just pull funding on programs or
Right.
something. So I don't know. Some of these districts should just. I just feel like a lot of people obviously, our government has a spending problem. You know what I mean? I just, like, look around, I'm just like,
Yes.
"Well, maybe we can educate all these kids for way less money." Like, I guess paying your teachers is the biggest expense, really,
Well,
which we were talking about the paying of the teachers before.
no,
There's a
but
bill out for that.
it, so I mean, I have paid some attention to the education system, and the biggest areas of cost growth have been the school building program.
Mm.
And, for example, there's a magnet school in Hartford. I think they spent $1 billion on the building.
Oof,
Yeah.
oof.
Okay. So I call these
Who
Taj
live
Mahal
there?
school.
Where's this school at? What's worth it?
Um, I'll have to look back at some of my old pieces, but yeah.
$1,000,000.
Or like right now, I think I saw today on Twitter that they're building a new school in somewhere down in Fairfield County. It's
In
like,
Stanford, we're getting a K-8.
okay, well, this is a high school, and I think it's going to cost $240 million. And or even in my district, in Region 18, they're redoing the reason that started this whole thing off was to redo the HVAC system, and we have some older school buildings, and they do need to be redone. But the cost estimate came in at $850,000 per classroom to put in upgraded HVAC systems, and then do all the other nice things that people wanted to do. Now, just think about $850,000 per classroom. So construction costs for schools are out of control. Schools don't teach kids, teachers teach kids. So we have the wrong priority in terms of making our schools nicer than they need to be. They need to be safe, functional buildings, but they don't need to be these monuments to some architect's ego or some school board's ego or to some state rep's ego who's, from the cost sharing formula for the poorer jurisdictions, 80% of the money for school construction comes from the state.
Right, through grants.
Right. So, no, when you spend other people's money, you're not very careful. That's
Right.
just human nature. So that's one part. And then the other part of growth in costs is administrators. The money, the growth in cost of education largely isn't making it into the teachers' pockets, which is where the rubber meets the road and the real learning happens, at least in my view. So
Yes, yes, so many programs, so many different things going on, and so many layers of bureaucracy. Yeah, I don't know at what point, like you said, it all seems so overwhelming, and, like, I try to be involved, you know, like, I've done a bunch of, like, even more local stuff here in Stanford, which I think is important in a state like Connecticut because 'cause we're the 2nd largest city and we're, like, like, the seat of Democratic power, which is, like, the super majority in Connecticut.
yeah,
So, I think it's an important place to, like, actually focus a lot of your energy to get bang for buck that would actually translate over into state politics. So that's sort of been like my explanation for why I haven't been as involved in the state legislature. Um, but even still, like, some of this stuff, I'm like, how is this sustainable, right? At some point, the bottom's gonna fall out, right? And
yeah,
then
and not to mention we have declining enrollment.
right.
But the
Well,
budget goes up no matter what. It's like at some point it just starts not like what?
right, yeah, I mean, we do have population issues. I know a lot of people are, like, saying, "Oh my god, there's so, population, too many people on this world and stuff," and I'm like, "Actually, if you look at population trends, they're going the other way." We have an unsustainable pyramid scheme going on here, and, yeah, I worries, so that when you said going back to the beginning or, earlier in our conversation, you said, America's been through its up and downs, and this is just another one of those times and we're going to get through it. And I often ask myself this question, and I've made this argument in various videos or in my channel that, yeah, maybe it is more tumultuous, maybe it isn't more tumultuous, but I do think that there actually are things that are different about now. Right? I
Mhm.
think we're a much more godless nation, right? Not even just like religious, but
True.
just
Yeah.
godless. And then the other thing is the debt, right? Like the debt is not comparable, and that's like a huge contextual piece in the background. So those
Well,
are two of my things when I'm like, all right, how long do we have until this falls out?
yeah, well, I don't know. Have you ever read a book called The Fourth Turning? It's
I've heard of the argument, like the different phases. I haven't read the book, but I'm familiar.
yeah, it's a very wonky historical perspective, but it looks in detail at these cycles. So I would recommend. There's actually, I think there's a the original book came out in the mid '90s, and its predictions are scarily accurate. And it was co-authored, and one of the fellows died, but one of them is still alive, a guy named Neil Howe. Um, and he wrote a new version last year called The Fourth Turning is Here. So if anybody is a real history nut, I would highly recommend The Fourth Turning is Here by Neil Howe. And you can YouTube him. He's got some interviews out there where you can kind of get a much quicker version of his view of history. But he goes back through about 500 years of history, looking at a generational cycle of, when people grow up in hard times, they have certain kinds of behaviors, and then that leads to them having children that have another certain kind of behaviors, and it goes through a sequence of 4 different generations over 80 to 100 years. So he would say that we're in a fourth turning, that the last one before this was a combination of the Great Depression and World War II. Before that, it was the American Civil War. And before that, it was the US Revolutionary War.
Oh, so
Just
then
to give
it
you
goes
an
back
idea of how
so does it go
tumultuous.
back to the Revolutionary War part now?
Well, yeah, I don't know. And he goes even before that in England, to
Okay.
various upheavals in England in the same periodicity. So
'Cause that's what I always worry about. I always worry about, like, that I'm raising my son just at the perfect time for him to, like, turn 18 just as, like, things really, like, pop off, you know?
Yeah,
Um, so that's
I
10 years. We got 10 years until he's 18. So do things settle back down, or do they continue on this trajectory?
I mean, nobody knows the future, right?
Nobody knows. All right, well, let's do some predictions though here at the end. Nobody does know the future, but maybe we won't go so far out. But we do have a presidential election coming up. And so what is your prediction for not just who's going to win it, right? Because I think that there's even questions before we get to the winner about who's going to be the candidate. So how do you see
Well,
playing out with, in the conventions or, who are the candidates gonna be? Like, what is
so,
your predictions?
if I had a prediction, I would be betting on it in the prediction markets, and I don't have a prediction. I'm just completely frustrated, and I feel like not voting for the first time in my
Okay,
life. That that
okay.
that's how frustrated I feel about it. Um, I wish no labels would come up with a candidate, but they can't seem to get anywhere. And I kind of wish that both Trump and Biden would withdraw their candidacy and let their
Yeah.
parties pick somebody else. But I just don't see that. I mean, I have a close friend who's made a lot of money, and he is very anti-Trump, and he is creating a program to invest in TikTok videos to encourage younger voters to get out to vote. And he sees Biden as representing the best answer for their concerns. So he was at a meeting with a major Democratic fundraiser about 3 weeks ago, or a party operative, I think is a better way to describe it, and expressing his frustration that, he really doesn't want to see Trump, but he's not very happy with Biden either. And this consultant, or I don't know who the person was, but I got a sense of their job, basically said, Biden's going to be the candidate, and you just need to get with the program. And I think that's how the Democratic Party is talking to their supporters right now.
It's not a
Based on
great argument.
based on that conversation, and a person who's committing a substantial amount of money to try to sway this election, and that's the response he got.
Well, if he wants to put the money into a better place, he can invest in helping grow this channel and,
There you go.
see what we can do about inspiring the next generation of free thinkers. All right. Well, Jim, this has been a fun conversation. I really love what you're doing over there on your Substack. So, guys, make sure that you get over to comments from Connecticut. I know that you said you're working on a new article. You want to just give us a little, like, sneak preview of what that's going to be?
Yeah, I'm still marinating the ideas, but basically, it's about the concept of political entrepreneurs. And just like when you hear somebody call themselves a political entrepreneur, my opinion is you should run the other direction, because just like on the internet, when the product is free, you are the product. And so think of it in that terms. When you hear somebody decides to have a career in politics and calls themselves a political entrepreneur.
Mm. Yes, be suspicious. I'll definitely be curious to see who's the subject or subjects of that article and what you have to say there. In the meantime, you guys can head over to X and give Jim a follow there at Antipodes52.
And antipodes, yes, it's
Antipodes.
those are the two opposite points on the globe.
Ooh, okay. I just learned something new. And
There
I
you,
don't know how I'm not following you. That's so weird. I'm sorry, I just followed you.
there you
Um,
go.
and yeah, so give him a follow. You can check me out on X. I'm on Instagram. I'm right here on YouTube. I'm also on Rumble if you prefer that platform. And make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're just finding your way here. And, I know you're in a bunch of group chats. I'm in a bunch of group chats, so I assume everybody's in the same, group chats. Uh, take the URL at the top and share this into your group chat and let them know it's a great conversation to check out just about the state of politics that's going on today. Tell them you love their beautiful face and tell them to live free and think free and give all the glory to God. Until next time, we'll see you right here every Monday night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And